Betty's room was frilly and pink. There were big throw pillows in the corner, also pink. As pink as her nipples, Jeff thought. He wondered how she got everything to match. "I love sex," Betty said. She unbuttoned his fly and slid her hand down past the elastic waistband of his underwear as he leaned back, giving her room. She cupped her hand around his soft balls. Jeff closed his eyes and quietly moaned. Betty pulled her hand out, sat up straight on the edge of the bed, and shifted away from him. "Now you probably think I'm a slut," she said. Jeff sat up carefully, blinking. "No," he said. "It's okay." He put his hand on her shoulder. His eyes were glazed, his vision misty, overwhelmed by swirls of pink, and he turned her for a deep kiss. Her tongue was soft and pointed, and it darted into his mouth, electric. "I mean," he whispered, "I love sex too." "Yeah," Betty said. She smiled. "Take off your pants. And your underwear." Jeff searched her face for signs that she was serious. Betty nodded, and Jeff hurriedly shucked off his jeans, getting his ankles tangled in the cuffs, and then slipped off his underwear. The room was chilly, and he could feel his balls constricting upwards against his inner thighs. His smooth penis was hard, and Jeff found himself surprised that he wasn't too terribly embarrassed, but he didn't look up at Betty's face. Betty unbuttoned her yellow blouse and unhooked her bra, slipping it off without taking off the blouse. Her breast wobbled slightly, half behind the yellow material. Jeff saw her pink nipples in quick glimpses as she shifted closer. Betty reached out her hand and closed it tightly around his penis. She began to move her hand up and down. Lightly," Jeff whispered. "Not so rough." "Yes, sir," Betty said, and they both giggled, and then looked down at their laps. Jeff couldn't watch what Betty was doing. That would be too much. So he leaned toward her and opened her blouse further with his nose and chin. He began to nuzzle between her breasts with his mouth, letting his warm breath escape. Jeff could barely concentrate on what he was doing. The washes of pleasure from the friction of Betty's hand, her soft hand, were all-encompassing. "That feels good," Betty whispered. Jeff dared to kiss her nipple. She didn't pull away, and, encouraged, he licked it. She shivered and stroked faster, more roughly, on his penis. This time he didn't protest. The rush of sensation was growing wilder in his groin. He closed his eyes and buried his face into her breasts. He was flowing pink, churned by eddies of red, patches of black, dark purples, whirlpools of glorious touch. He was afraid he might drown, could fall all the way in, and he did feel like he was scrambling to hold on to something, an edge, a slippery riverbank. But there was no stopping. He splashed in a swirling well of feeling, broke through the taut membrane of orgasm, and pleasure exploded up in him, droplets falling musically. Jeff gasped into Betty's breasts. He didn't think he had the strength to lift his head. Betty shifted, opened her hand, held it out awkwardly away from their bodies. "Gross," she said. "You've really made a mess." "Sorry," Jeff said numbly. They were both silent a moment, and then they broke out into laughter. After they had cleaned up, Betty mentioned that her father had left some pornography up in the attic. "Where did he go, anyway?" Jeff asked. "Your body's gotten much better," Betty said. "I could tell you've been working out. And your legs got all hairy." Jeff blushed. "Thanks," he said. "My mom bought me weights, and I work out all the time in the basement. I've got you to thank for that, I guess." "Well, you're welcome," Betty stood up, tucked in her shirt. "Want to go up to the attic to see? Isn't your mother coming home?" "We have time," Betty said. It was more of a crawl space than a true attic. To reach it, Betty had to pull down a square trapdoor in the back of Agnes's closet. "This is totally illegal," Betty said, shining a flashlight into the hole. She crawled in first. Jeff peered into the trapdoor after her disappearing legs. "Are you sure your mother won't come back?" he asked nervously. "Relax." Betty pointed the flashlight in Jeff's direction, blinding him. "Just watch your head and stay on the path." The attic was cramped and cluttered. The points of nails poked out of the bare wooden beams high above. Strips of dull pink insulation lined the floor, between thick supports. Like a tongue, a path of flat brown splintery planks stretched crookedly across the insulation. Stacked boxes loomed, warping, flaps out, near the end of the path. There was a dingy bassinet, leaning framed flowery prints, an aviator's cap, and a dented birdcage. It all smelled of mothballs and dust. "Any secret treasures up here?" Jeff asked. "Yeah, right," Betty said, lighting the path in front of him with the flashlight. "Not unless you count the porno." "Where is it?" Jeff poked around, tugging at box corners, watchful for spiders. Betty rummaged through the nearest box. "I found it looking for his old science textbooks," she said. "My father hid it really well, that bastard." "Yeah?" Jeff asked. "Where'd he go, anyway?" Betty regarded him a moment. Jeff's hair was sticking up endearingly in the back, like tall weeds over the crest of a hill. She handed him the flashlight. "You look for old textbooks," she said. "I've got to go to the bathroom." She tried to squeeze past him on the path. "Wait," Jeff said. "What?" "Don't I get a kiss?" Betty laughed. "What are we, married?" She kissed his lips quickly, and Jeff smiled and adjusted to give her room to safely squirm past on the path and crawl her way out. Downstairs, Doris didn't look up from her craftsmanship as Betty walked into the living room. "Mom's going to come home and then you'll be in trouble," Doris said evenly. "I hate you so much," said Betty. "I don't care. I hate you too." Betty sat down on the couch beside Doris. "You're too young to hate anyone," Betty said. "You don't even know what it means." "I know you and Jeff were having sex." Doris folded a sheet of white paper into quarters, running her finger along the edge to make a sharp seam. "I could tell Mom." "I could tell about when you used Mom's lipstick when she wasn't home and messed it all up and had to flush it down the toilet," Betty said. "I don't care," Doris said. "Sex is much worse." Betty stood up. "Doris," she said, "you are a pseudopod, and I hate you." She reached down, plucked up a strand of paper people, and ripped off the arm of the person at one end of the chain. Then she ripped off the arm of the person at the other end. "Hey," whined Doris. "Betty, not the arms, the legs. They can't fly if you rip off the arms." Betty dropped the mangled paper people. "I can't believe I'm related to you," she said, and she walked down the hallway to the bathroom.